This episode was made possible by our incredible donors. Their faithful support allows us to continue the work of amplifying the voices of religious abuse survivors. We committed early on never to monetize any of the stories, so we rely solely on donations from people like you. If you value the work and are able to contribute, you can become a monthly donor at the link in our show notes. Another way to support Bodies Behind the Bus is by following, rating, and reviewing the podcast. It only takes a moment, but has a tremendous impact on our reach. Thank you for daring to listen. All right, welcome back, everybody. We have another great episode today with Joash. He's going to be talking about, we're going to be sharing more from his book, which I'm holding up right now. If you can't see it, I don't think you can. The Justice of Jesus. And if you are listening to this right now, the book is already out. So we've already released one episode. The book is out. You should have already purchased it, and you're following along with your book as we talk about it. But we're going to continue these conversations with Joash. This is our second episode. We're calling it Just Calling. Today, we're going to be talking about budgets, specifically from chapter 6, which is called Decolonizing Our Budgets. There's a lot of great stuff in there. Joash, welcome back to the podcast. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so excited for this conversation. And I don't think I've ever been on any other podcast where we've devoted a whole episode to decolonizing our budgets. So this is a first. Love it.
Yes.
We really like to just be extra here at Bodies Behind the Bus. We love to just dig in deep and make people uncomfortable.
Yeah,
awesome. Up to the status quo. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's important to be uncomfortable. And I mean, this chapter is great. There's a lot in this chapter. We're going to talk just a little bit about it. And then if you have questions for Joash on this particular episode, please email them in. Or as you're reading the book, if you have questions, could you email them in to us? Because we want to have future episodes where we take the book, The Justice of Jesus, and talk more in depth about it with Joash. So awesome. All right. So where do we start? Lots of good quotes from this chapter. I'm going to start with one that really stood out at the beginning of the chapter, where you mentioned there's a correlation between how we view money and how we view justice. Real briefly, like what does that, I mean, I know you wrote about it, but what does that mean to you, and why was that important to include in this chapter? So
I'll start by just reading the first paragraph of this chapter, right? This is a book about justice, but as you probably picked up by now, this is also a book about wealth. Whether or not we are comfortable acknowledging this, there is a direct correlation between how we view money and how we view justice. Right? So Jesus taught that where our money is, there our heart will also be, right? And it's the same idea that if you want to get a sense of what's really important to the Western church, look at where we spend our money. And what I have seen firsthand doing the work of fundraising for justice causes and organizations in the North American church, I've seen firsthand that the vast majority of churches and ministries, like the vast majority of their budget, really 80 to 90%, goes towards a number of things, but mostly its own needs. And then if they have some surplus, it goes towards like spiritual needs, right? And justice is really an afterthought. And I challenge us and say, if the Western church has been complicit in participating in extracting wealth and resources from all over the world and enabling Western empires in doing so, then maybe we should actually spend more on justice than we do on evangelism and discipleship. Not that they're disconnected to me, but something needs to be right-sized here to make things right. And I call that the Zacchaeus thing to do, because this is what we see Zacchaeus doing after his encounter with Jesus. So anyway, those are just a few thoughts to introduce the idea of decolonizing our budgets.
I think that part of, as I was reading through this and thinking about, the survivors that we work with, the stories that we have carried on Bodies Behind the Bus, or that we carry even in our inbox that don't ever come to you guys publicly as you're listening. Something that Jay and I talk about a lot, and actually our whole board talks about a lot, is this tie of money and resources to, like, directly actually ties to injustice. Not only is it a lack of us funding justice movements, but there's also ways that money is being utilized to perpetrate injustice or justify injustice. And so as we continue into this conversation, I think that's a part of the conversation I don't want to leave out, is the fact that when we tie ourselves to empire with our money, it does actually make pursuing justice and being people of justice, people that follow the justice of Jesus and do the justice of Jesus here on this earth with our lives, it complicates it. Because now we're looking at, if I do the just right thing in this situation, if I'm a church leader who is being faced with, a situation where I have to choose right or I have to choose my job, a lot of times people choose their job because they need to feed their families or they don't have another option. And so that's part of what I'd love for us to kind of pull apart today as well, is how is money used? Can it be used as a tool for justice? And how is it also being used as a tool to hinder justice?
Yeah, I think that's so good, Johnna. I mean, I don't need to belabor this point, but we live in a time where people are losing their jobs for speaking out, right? Not just within the church, but even outside the church. The power structures of empire are almost feels like they're getting stronger and stronger and more vicious against dissenters and prophets, really, who speak out against the status quo on behalf of our marginalized neighbors. Yeah, so this thing has a cost to it for both prophets inside and outside the church. And so I think it's important for us to recognize that money, even in Jesus's day, and this is a minor point I make in the book, but even in Jesus's day, money was a luxury of the wealthy. What I mean to say by that is the average person in Jesus's Jewish Palestinian context did not actually possess money. That's mind-blowing for us to think of today. But the reality is that in Jesus's time, they had barter systems, they exchanged goods, they traded goods, and that's how you took care of your family. So the only people who actually had money and had money in their wallets were people with wealth and means who had privileged status in empire. A very different economy from today's economy where, people have money. But yeah, that was the way things were. If you had money, you had privileged status and empire. And I think the same, to a degree, can also be true today. Like those of us who have money in our bank accounts, we do enjoy some type of privileged status within the empire structures, right? And so how do we be good stewards of that? We can't change the past, but how can we be faithful with what we find ourselves entrusted with in the present?
Yeah, that's a great thing. In your book, you write, but it could be that our inherited colonized theology is also driving the way that we manage our household budgets, which I think is convicting even for me, and it talks a lot. And then you go on to say, and I want to get into this next, about, you describe prioritizing soul saving over physical needs. And I think this is a very distinct, a great distinction that we need to call out. So talk to us about what does that mean? Like, what do you mean by prioritizing soul saving over physical needs in the church setting and in our own lives as well?
I'll give us a real example of this that I'm sure many of your listeners have heard when they bring cases of abuse forward, whether it's spiritual abuse, sexual abuse. What is the number one defense we're presented with, right? It's, can we just keep this to ourselves and not let word get out? We don't want to hinder the gospel. We don't want to get in the way of people being saved, or when you complain about an abusive leader in the church and the response is, but look at all the good they did. Look at all the souls that were saved because of them, right? Like, isn't that more important? To which survivors and the margins are like, well, yeah, but what about the people they've harmed? What about the reckoning there, right? And this, I think, in many ways, is also the discourse today, whether it's a Charlie Kirk or a John MacArthur or a James Dobson. When abusive bullies die, instead of standing in solidarity with the people they've bullied and marginalized, why is it that we as evangelicals have this tendency to stand with the bullies and the oppressors and make excuses for them? Something is seriously broken when things like that happen. And, I think in many ways we stop acting like Jesus people and we start acting like a cult of empire, which was normal for Jesus' day. You had cults, religious cults of empire, of the Roman emperor. They worshiped the Roman emperor. They were called cults of empire, basically. They were, they believed that the emperor was the son of God and they treated the emperor like the son of God. And then in the midst of that, you had the early church proclaiming, no, Jesus is the son of God. And that was a politically charged statement for that time that got them in trouble. In addition to standing with their marginalized neighbors. So I think it's important for us to reckon with how diametrically opposed the way of Jesus is to the way of empire, and how we need to be cross-shaped more than empire-shaped. Yeah.
I think that's something that I'm processing as you're saying that, is I'm thinking through, where do I see the most like Jesus fruit around me? Like faithful, steadfast, just goodness.
Right.
And it's rarely, maybe never in the flashy places or the places that are like having a big impact or a big reach. It's in the like small, faithful acts. Usually the slow. It's not usually this like fire that lights and everything is just like, oh, money's pouring in and we are doing so much for this, and this. And like, can you believe that this many people gave this much and we did this thing? Like, usually those things come at a cost of actually caring. Like, usually there's a bus running over somebody in those scenarios. Where I see Jesus' work happening is in these smaller places that don't look flashy. And I think as I've been just processing where we're at in this political moment in the world, to be honest, but especially in the West, and thinking about like the movements, not just in the church, but like the movements that have funding and that are resourced, they are all feel reactive or counter Jesus's mission for us. And so that's something that like I guess I'm wrestling with as we're talking about this, is how do we find those places and be faithful with our budgets and with what we have tangibly to be giving money and funds to people that are doing that slow, messy, steadfast work that Jesus calls us into? Like, how do we actually be the tangible hands and feet? And how do we even find those spaces? Because they're not the ones that have the best SEO usually, you know? Like it takes actual intentionality and community to find those spaces, I think.
Yeah, I was gonna read some of the book that we can go to that, but I think that's a great point, Johnna, because I also would say from growing up in the church, in and out of the church, specifically the Western white church, and one of the things that I was always pushed as a young teenager was evangelism, was prioritizing soul saving over everything else, whether that be mission trips. I remember I read that David Platt book, Radical, which I can't stand that book. But that book was basically like, go out there and like, if you're not living, somewhere with the Bible, I mean, I'm doing a horrible summary, but you're not out there with the Bible in your hand preaching to people, like you're not living life. And I felt so horrible after reading that book. And I was like, I don't want to like go somewhere and do that. Like, I don't want to do it. And like, am I not a Christian and all this? And I remember like walking away from that book and being like, man, this isn't it. Like, this isn't what I read in the Bible. And the more that I've gotten away from the Western church in America, as far as like the structures and systems, I've seen the gospel on display through different organizations and functions outside of the church that show more Jesus than the church ever did. And so I think we have to broaden our way of looking at it. And I will give you a great way. Joash says, a decolonized model of evangelism to people on the margins will not look past the oppressed bodies of our neighbors just to get to their souls. On the contrary, a decolonized model will see the state of our marginalized neighbors, oppressed bodies, lament at their reality with them, and then explore ways to physically liberate them from their oppression. The same way Jesus first liberated us spiritually and physically. If our marginalized neighbors encounter liberation in Jesus through our actions and care for their physical needs, they will have powerfully encountered Jesus's gospel. So like, I think like you do give us a good segue to say like, where should we look to spend our time? And you mentioned earlier in the book that like, if we've benefited from colonization and empire, which we have, shouldn't it be our responsibility to give more to these spaces? And it is. So a great example is like down the street, there's a place that works with me. It's a law firm, not works with me, I'm sorry. It's a law firm that specializes in helping people detained by ICE, helping immigrants that are struggling in that. And like, I've given money to them in the past, not enough. And after reading this book, I was like, I need to figure out how I can help more resources to give to those types of places. They're not Christian. They're not like a religious organization, but their message is very much gospel centered in how they're approaching people. And I just love, Joash, how you changed the narrative for us to say, what are the physical needs of the body? Where do you see hurt and pain? Where can you step in and show Jesus with our funds and resources? And I think that's a beautiful way for us to start this process.
Yeah. I mean, it's quite sad that so many Western Christians who care deeply about justice are gaslit into thinking that doing good works is not doing Christian work, right? And it's sad because what you described about your neighbors, the organization that fights ICE, that's gospel work right there. I mean, even if they don't identify as Christian, Christ is there because Christ is everywhere, right? Christ is all and in all. And we need to cultivate the eyes to see Jesus at work in our neighbors, even among neighbors who don't claim his name, who do things that we're supposed to be doing. So it's encouraging that there are people out there doing this, but it's deeply discouraging that the church doesn't do this. The church isn't known, apart from some quarters of the church, like the Catholic Church right now, who are sending bishops and clergy at Pope Leo's instructions to stand with people being deported by ICE right now. But for the vast majority of the church, there's just not that care and advocacy for those set of marginalized neighbors right now. And that's because we've been gaslit by our theology into thinking that for something to be explicitly Christian, it has to be in the name of Jesus, right? I mean, there are entire Christian organizations who do good work, who say things like, we're doing this in Jesus's name, to appeal to that base of Christian donors. And that base of Christian donors won't give to anything unless they feel like, I talk about this in the book too. There are a lot of Christian donors who won't give to good work unless they feel like Christ is also being verbally proclaimed there, unless they feel like they won't sponsor children, unless they feel like, those children are being taught about Jesus too. They won't sponsor kids being rescued from trafficking. I've come across people like that too, unless they feel like, those kids are converted to Christianity after they're rescued from trafficking.
Can we talk for a second about, or just notice collectively on this call for a second,
Yeah.
that is, if tangible help in emergencies for vulnerable people is dependent upon them hearing about or believing in Jesus, That's a coercive faith. That is
Yes.
not an example of how Jesus did ministry on this earth. That is us utilizing privilege and power as the church, as a
Yeah.
Christian organization, to prey upon vulnerable people in order to get funding. And
Yeah.
if you're listening to that and you have problems with that, or something's rising up in you, like, one, feel free to email us. I'm happy to dialogue a little bit. But like, really what I would like is for us just to kind of sit with that. Like, is good work being done in a lot of these places? Yes. And also, there's this other side to it where there's coercion involved and manipulation, and lives are dependent on it. So it's not
Yeah.
like you have a decision when you're a kid that's being trafficked,
Yeah.
which organization saves you. Like, it,
Yeah.
you
And
know?
I've told this to Christian donors too, Johnna. Like, do you really want to introduce Jesus to people like that? Or are you suddenly now on board with a prosperity gospel? Because that's what that is. That's a prosperity gospel. If you're tricking people into following Jesus, is that really an authentic conversion? Are they really following Jesus? And no, you're manipulating them. You're coercing them. I mean, the same can be said for, our friend Kevin and I talks about Christian ministries across North America that do work among unhoused folks and basically put restrictions on them. Like, we won't feed you or give you shelter unless you show up to weekly Bible study or unless you show up to weekly chapel or church. And Jesus never did stuff like that. So why are we doing stuff like that? And so, if it was good enough for Jesus and if it was good enough for the early church, it should also be good enough for us.
And you do touch on that in the chapter about not having the ability. I think you referenced one of your old professors and like saying that they were like, the global South needs, Western theology. They need to hear from us. And there is this lack of well, humility is probably not a strong enough word, willingness of the church to just sit and listen. And I think that also sits in these spaces where we want to come in and say, no, we have the solution to this, and you need to fall in line and follow that solution. And it does run counter to Christ, because every time that, when I go back to, I have a different relationship with the Bible than I did even 5 years ago. But every time I go back to what was written about Jesus and where you see Jesus interact with people, it is so contrary to
Mm.
everything else in the Bible. And it's not, it doesn't fit, and you can't fit it in to how those systems worked back then. He's always cutting across the line and being like, we're going to do this now, and his interactions. And somewhere along the way, we have lost that curiosity, which I know you talk about curiosity later, but we've also just lost that heart to
Mm.
just sit with ourselves of saying, like, I don't know, like, I'm uncomfortable by this, and I don't know what to do. I'm just going to sit here. And I think we have to get back to that, especially when we're dealing with situations that we don't have any knowledge on. Like, we don't know what it's like to be unhoused. If we're not unhoused, we're not, especially if we're in a white church, we don't know what it's like to be a person of color in a primarily white place. We don't know what that feels like. We don't know what it feels like to be in another country and have Western ideas and morals and values put in place, and we take all your resources out. We don't know what that feels like. So we need to sit in that space of curiosity, and like I think Jesus did. But you say in your book that Jesus would rather sit with those that are marginalized, or sorry, stand with those that are marginalized and sit with those in power. And my God, is that a t-shirt idea that we need to have across this USA right now? So anyways.
I really appreciate what you were talking about, Jay. And part of what I'm thinking, even as you're saying that and mulling over how this all fits into this moment we're in, is, as people have been kind of deconstructing out of evangelicalism, or those that are still within Western evangelicalism and maybe listening to this, because I know there's quite a few of you that are still going to churches and are still, participating in community, which we're not here to tell you to leave those spaces. But we are here to ask everybody to just be curious and to not live in fear of asking questions. I think we say that a lot in all of our stories, and that is the purpose of this series as well, Just Calling. And something that we talked about while we were coming up with this series is this idea that justice is just for the heroic few. And I think that we see that so much when it comes to how individually we spend our money or what we support with our money. I believe strongly that a huge reason we are why we are where we are as the Western church right now is because we have been kind of conditioned that really, as long as you show up at church every Sunday and you give 10%, then the people that are in charge, the staff, the pastor, the elders, they're going to tell you what to do. And they use your money to do whatever charitable thing. They have to be the ones that are good stewards. And, I have a disconnected relationship with where my money goes to fund charitable things, or when it comes to, what causes it is being used to support. And that disconnectedness also causes a disconnection from community, causes a disconnection from the people that we say we care about, especially when it comes to initiatives that are going to support or fund resources for marginalized spaces. There's so many degrees of separation, and we're putting all our trust into these few people who may be great people. I'm not here to tell you if they're good or bad, or if they're making good or bad decisions. You have to decide that on your own through asking questions and being discerning about where you're giving funds. But I think even if those people are amazing and funding amazing things, that disconnected part of it, it has kind of like malformed us. We have not been really discipled into a relational connection with what our funds are going towards, or how to actually tangibly step into a space where we have maybe more resources at the moment. And I think this will resonate with people when you hear this. I have been told at multiple points, and have thought this at multiple points of my life as a white, Western, evangelical woman, that when you see like a panhandler on the side of the road, you don't need to give them money because they might not use that money in a way that is healthy or safe for them. So really, you need to give money to your church so they can fund homeless initiatives. So you can say to them, I'm so sorry, I don't have any cash. I give to an organization that helps with this, and that's where I have money to give. That does not give that person a meal tonight. They're like, cool, thanks. It doesn't help them. But that disconnectedness it fills a slot in my mind, or filled prior to really digging this out and looking at it myself. It filled a space where I could then say, I do give to help people like this person, and I don't have to actually reckon with the person right in front of me who is suffering. That was a big, long grandstand that I don't know what. Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, Johnna. I mean, your thoughts sparked some thoughts for me, which is basically the quote that I drop at the introduction of this chapter. It's from an early church father, Irenaeus, who died in born in 130 AD in Turkey, and died in Lyon, France. And so again, early church father, basically saying this: instead of the tithes which the law commanded, the Lord said to divide everything we have with the poor. This is Irenaeus, in the first century of the church, reframing and defining what tithing is. For us in the 21st century. For us in the 21st century, tithing is giving to our church so that it can pay the mortgage on its building property, right? And a very inspiring vision as a fundraiser. I always have to laugh at that kind of vision. It's why would people give to that? Of course, you're not meeting your capital giving targets, Throw in some justice in there. Inspire people with a vision for generosity. But But here's how Irenaeus defines justice. Here's how he defines tithes. He's like, well, the Old Testament law said that we give our tithe, but the New Testament law, the New Testament way, according to Jesus, is to divide everything we have with the poor. So forget your 10%. God demands more than your 10%. He demands everything. Everything you have is your neighbor's. It's not yours. You didn't build that. And that's a controversial statement to American evangelicals. But the reality is that we're all interconnected. Nothing we own belongs to us. It belongs to God. We give to Caesar what's Caesar, and we give to God what's God, which is us, everything in us and everything in the world. The earth is the Lord's and everything in it belongs to the Lord. And so if we believe that, then we will share everything we have with the poor and not put a 10% restriction on it, the way the Old Testament law commanded, because Jesus reframes everything and Jesus changes everything. And early church leaders like Irenaeus, that's how they saw tithing. So none of the stuff we're talking about here is 21st century inventions. Like this stuff isn't new. It's always been there in the Christian tradition. We're just bringing it to light in our 21st century context that's so disconnected from history and the Christian tradition.
I remember I went to church a lot, and it would have been 2010. It would have been earlier than that. It would have been 2006 or 7, 2005. I can't remember. And this was in Texas. I'm not going to say the church because I don't want to give them any whatever. But the church did a push for giving for a new building, and they wanted to raise $150 million. And this, it would have been about 2005, 2006. And they rolled out in a service like how you could give to them. They had a big model of the church of what it would look like. They rolled it out, and they said, "Here's how you could give to us. Give your retirement to us." I wish I'd saved the pamphlet, but it was like, give your retirement. If you're going to retire, like wait another year. If you're going to take a vacation, give us that money instead. If you have a 401k, give us some money from your 401k. If you have valuables, sell those and give us the money. It was all of these things. And I looked at the diagram or whatever, the model. It was literally a fucking parking lot and a bigger building, and then like all of this other stuff that like didn't matter. And I walked out of there, and this was like, I was still very much into like churches where I need to give to church. I walked out of there and my soul was so troubled. And I was like, this makes no sense to me at all. And I just thought to myself, I've always used that model to be like, they raised the money. They like killed it. They crushed it. They didn't take any debt out. They built the building. It's there. It's in Texas. There's a giant outdoor baptismal if you want to see it. And I just thought, like, if we as a Western church took that much passion to raising money to fight, I don't know, let's say poverty, or I don't know, throw something else, homelessness, throw something else out there to raise money for these things, it would radically shift and change the way that we are as a society. But we don't. And that, my friends, is how our budgets are colonized, because we think a fucking parking lot is more important than people. And we do. And I went to that church and I had trouble leaving. And I was like, should I give them money for a parking lot? And I didn't, but I still thought about it. And I think that that's like a great example. And that is going on. That is still going on. And I just want to throw that out there because I feel like the spirit of it is like, that's how we have to approach it. And we do have the ability to raise money. We're just raising money for the wrong stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think as you're saying that, I'm thinking about some of the shifts that started in me. A lot of the larger shifts that started in me was when I started listening to adoptee voices. I'm an adoptive mom. Jay's an adoptive dad, and listening to adoptees specifically about like the industry of adoption and how our money is utilized in those spaces.
Yeah.
And so much of, even when we did adopt, so much of it was tied up in this idea of being pro-life, like how can we come alongside a vulnerable single mom or a vulnerable pregnant mother that, wants to carry the child but doesn't feel like they have the means to keep their child and their family. And they need help, and this is a way to like stave off abortion, right? So like you can work your way through all these, like, this is where my money's going in order to do this thing. And now I'm not saying that this is like specific to our adoption story or Jay's adoption story, but this is a common story in adoption. And as I learned more, I realized that if I actually want to be pro-life, if I actually love these kids, if I actually care about this, it's going to take me being in relationship with these communities and doing everything I can financially, with whatever privilege I have, whatever voice I have, to work towards social supports for these women so that they aren't in a situation where they either they think they have to separate from their child so that their child has a chance at, XYZ opportunities. And like ideally, we would be funding these families so that they can stay together. And so that's not part of it. I'm not saying I'm anti-adoption. Don't hear that. I'm saying that that's part of how I started like weeding through kind of the way that our budgets are colonized. And I think that happened prior to even weeding through some of the stuff that was happening in my heart when it came to, it's not deconversion, deconstruction. So we're
You're already there. Yeah.
I'm already here. But like stuff like that, it's so much easier to be like, I'm going to give money to this pro-life organization that helps people to adopt. But you're disconnected from the realities of the relational, communal aspect of what is actually happening when adoption happens. And like, how can we actually, as the church in the West could 1000% be funding social supports that make adoption rare and safe, and have it be something where this is happening because this is actually what's needed and it's not due to a lack of means. Right. But we're not doing that because that's not the flashy fast thing. The flashy fast thing is this person's never going to be able to care for their child, so we may as well just like throw some money their way and then let this family who already has means do it. Like that is just kind of a general idea for it. I don't know if this makes sense for you guys, but that's part of how I started parsing through some of this.
Well, throw out there's 400,000 kids roughly in foster care across the nation that don't have homes to go to. The church could easily step in and be a bridge for those kids, and also be a bridge for the families that are in places where they're not doing well, and help be the bridge for those families to come back together. And some Christians do, and some churches do, so I don't want to minimize that. And not just Christians, people of faith, other people of faith do, and other organizations of faith do. But we could totally radicalize that as a community and make it completely different, to where that foster care and the families impacted by foster care have resources to heal and be families again. But we don't. And instead we blame communities, marginalized communities, and we blame people, and we judge.
And this is why our churches have charitable tax-free status, right? Both in the US and Canada. They have that charitable tax-free status so that they can fill in the gaps where the government can't in providing social services. And right now, one of the biggest threats to the financial feasibility of churches is people outside the church who've been hurt by the church, or who don't see Christianity as a net positive for the common good, for good reason. Those people saying things like, well, why are churches tax-free? Revoke their charitable status if they're doing this stuff, right? And I run into churches in Canada all the time that are like, we can't have that, we're going to collapse. I'm like, okay, fine. But instead of saying that, give the world a positive reason to give you a tax-free status. Do something about the social needs around you. Don't expect, you're not getting a charitable status so that you can fund your building so that more souls get saved. Like, that's not why you're given a charitable tax-free status. You're given that so that you can contribute to the common good. So do it. And here's the good news. You're not doing it because Empire is telling you to do it. You're doing it because you're supposed to do that anyway. Jesus told you to do that. So just do what Jesus told you to do. And in this area, in justice, you'll actually make more friends and allies with people outside the church. It's not that revolutionary.
Before we talk about decolonizing, steps to decolonize our budgets, there's a story you share about Raymond Flanks that I actually think is a great example of how we're missing it. So can you share about that conversation with Raymond and a little bit about his story from the book?
Yeah. So Raymond Flanks was set free from life imprisonment in Louisiana through the Innocence Project, and just has this crazy story of still being such a hopeful, positive, uplifting kind of guy. Met Jesus in prison. And he talked about a Baptist group from a nearby Baptist Bible college or seminary coming and regularly doing Bible studies in prison. And so I got to meet Raymond at this panel we spoke on together at the Evangelical Theological Society a couple of years ago in Texas, and was really inspired by Raymond. And then, as after he shared his story, because we were talking about justice, and there were a couple of other theologians and myself on this panel with Raymond, a Black female academic raised her hand and said, well, I appreciated that these churches came and did Bible studies and visited you in prison, but did they even show any interest in why you were there? And he was wrongfully in prison, wrongfully put in prison for murder with a life sentence, by the way. And the reality is that these Baptist church groups did not really show interest in his case, did not devote resources towards his physical liberation, and were only really interested in his spiritual destination. And again, that's not the Jesus way. You don't see Jesus doing that. You don't see Jesus ignoring the physical needs of people he came into contact with. He taught spiritual truths, but those spiritual truths were made known through the physical. And so anyway, I think things like this, we've almost been conditioned to look at, oh, prison ministry, so cool. You're going and doing a Bible study in prison. But what about those who are wrongfully imprisoned? Like, what does Jesus's gospel have to say to them? And Jesus's gospel actually is specifically written to them, because Luke chapter 4, verse 18 is about liberating people from the dungeons of oppression, setting the captive free, right? I mean, this is Jesus's definition of the gospel. So why wouldn't we apply it to this justice issue? But that's not how we're conditioned. We're conditioned to go in there and save lost souls, instead of caring for their physical well-being and even liberating them from that, if they're wrongfully punished by empire, which Jesus also was, by the way. Yeah. And I'll say this, like, the reason why I wrote a chapter on decolonizing our budgets, the reason why we're talking about this right now, is because if we decolonize our budgets, we as the church and as the people in the church can actually solve so much of the world's justice needs, because the generosity is there. Like Jay said, like Johnna said, the generosity, the money is there. The generosity may not be there, but the money is there. And we just need to reframe generosity for our communities, for them to see that, no, actually, when I give towards the common good, that is a form of gospel proclamation too, because Jesus is made known. And if it's good enough, if it was good enough for Jesus in the early church, it should be good enough for us.
Yeah, and that story to me is a great example of caring about the physical body versus just prioritizing the physical body over the spiritual. And because that's really what would happen with Raymond. That group probably went in there thinking, this is great what we're doing, but they didn't take the time to just simply say, who is this man? Why is he here? What is he struggling with? And then fighting for him. And like, those are just subtle shifts that we don't have to think like grandiose and be like, I've got to solve this problem. We just need to look at our own community, our own neighbors, because it's there. Like, it's there. So go ahead, John. I think you're going to say something.
I am. So at multiple points since starting Bodies Behind the Bus, we pretty often actually get requests for help. And Sacred Wilderness, as a nonprofit, we do our best to help people when we can. We do not bring in very much money, but with the money we do, much of it goes out to people with needs. And I will say I have spent a lot of time calling churches asking for help for survivors of multiple different types of abuses and systems. And I have only had the church that I attend currently offer to help in any of these situations. I have seen listeners of Bodies Behind the Bus or people who follow me on social media step up and meet needs on a few occasions where I've thrown out like, hey, this is the need, here's my Venmo, and we just like get it done through Venmo. But if you're a church leader listening to this, I have called around and done the benevolent stance, trying to get, people that are in dire situations help. And there is so many roadblocks. And I understand that there has to be the accountability in how you spend your money, and there needs to be systems in place that create a situation where you can be an effective and good steward. But I wonder if this could be an encouragement to you, if you are a church leader listening to this, to think through what are the roadblocks that are keeping us from being able to meet needs of people within our communities. Because when I'm calling churches in the area that the person is at. And you want to know what's even sadder to me is often I will say, this is the need. Can you help them? And not only can you help them financially, but are there people in your church that can be in relationship with this person? Because so often it's not just a financial need. It's a loneliness. It's an isolation. It's just a need for someone to see them and see their humanity and walk alongside of them, whether it's a car bill or losing a home or getting evicted or not having grocery money, or not being able to pay your phone bill or, XYZ. There's so many things. And it's sad to me that there are so many barriers in place for churches to even be able to step into those spaces. And they are getting stepped into where we can, but the need is so great. And the resources are so huge when it comes to the Western church that there isn't really an excuse for why this is happening. So if you have that privilege, if you are in a position of influence within your church, I hope that this is an encouragement to think about the ways that your own budget as a church, or the way that you do benevolence, or the way you think about how do we meet the needs of our community. If there are barriers for people in your community to get the dire help that they need in the moment, when you do have the money, you just don't have you don't have it set up in a way that it's easy to meet those needs, then I think there's something wrong. And I don't think it should be Johnna Harris on Twitter throwing out Venmo requests for people every time we get one of these situations.
Yeah, I love that. And, I understand that church leaders have budgets to fund every year, that there's concern that there won't be enough money to pay your staff well. And I say this throughout the book, like, by all means, pay your staff, pay your volunteers who are doing staff work, because you can't be a church that's against modern slavery while, treating your staff and volunteers like slaves. So don't underpay your staff, pay them well, by all means, do that. And at the same time, find ways to be benevolent, find creative ways to fund the work of justice. And so one creative way to do what Johnna just suggested is, you may not have the funds from your budget to give to Bodies Behind the Bus for needs like this, but you could do an announcement on a Sunday morning at your church. You could have someone like Johnna or Jay come to your church and talk about their work and give them the freedom to ask for monthly donors. And I guarantee you, people will respond. People will be moved. And here's what I've seen in doing this, because I've done this at churches across the US and Canada, where I've gone on a Sunday morning, represented a justice organization, asked for monthly donors, and and that does take trust from the church leader, because there's often this fear among church leaders that if people give to an organization outside the church, they're not going to give to the church. There's that scarcity empire shaped mindset. But what what church leaders I've worked with over the years will tell you is that when you present a compelling vision for generosity to your people, they will also give to the needs in their own community and in their own church, needs that are important and that need to be met, like paying your staff well. They will give towards that, because now you've given them a compelling vision, you've unlocked that generosity, and it will beget more generosity. Just trust God with that, and just watch what God does in your community through that. And I know we talk about different ways to decolonize our budget so that we can ultimately support organizations like Bodies Behind the Bus. And I hope that I hope that listeners here even, lean into that opportunity. Like, if you've been blessed by, and I promise you, Johnna or Jay didn't ask me to say this, but if you've been encouraged by this podcast, their work, if you've been edified, encouraged, strengthened, rejuvenated, and you want to make a way for others to also experience this, for others who need hope to also find that hope through the work they're doing of standing with survivors and telling their stories, would you consider becoming a monthly donor with whatever you have, right? Even if it's $20 a month, every amount matters and makes a world of difference, especially to a small nonprofit like Sacred Wilderness. I hope we see generosity towards the work that you both do in this too, because you don't advertise this, but you're not really paid for the work that you do here either. You're doing this. If anything, it's costing you money and relationships and time and peace of mind to do this work and stand with survivors. And it doesn't have to be that way. People listening right now can come alongside you and show solidarity in that way too.
Thank you. That's very kind of you. Yeah, it's a awkward thing we talk about. I think we spend an average about 40 to 60 hours with each storyteller, just from start to finish, to get their episode up, and then after that, there's hours that are spent afterwards. And we get a lot of people that look for resources, that look for help, that need mental health services or need financial support. And honestly, the hope behind why we started Sacred Wilderness is so we could do more of that, and we'd love to. So, that's really where we want funds to go, is helping people get this resources that they need to feel whole and loved and seen again. So, thank you for that. Okay, before we start, there's just one last question if you want to, and we can go in depth or you can summarize it, but I think you do give us 3 ways to kind of start to, and you've talked a little bit about it, but steps to decolonize our budgets. I'll let you kind of drive it, Joash. What are those steps? And then, where can we start? And I know we've kind of gone back and forth, but what would you like to share specifically, from this chapter?
This book isn't just a diagnosis, right? It's a hopeful, where do we go from here kind of a thing. And so I give us specific ways to decolonize our budgets. 3 main steps. Number 1, assess our resources, right? Look at what your budgets are going towards right now. Are they going towards spiritual things? Like, after you take care of yourself and your family and your church community and your church staff and all that, right? Like, with the rest of the funds that you have, where is that going, right? Is that going towards meeting the spiritual needs of our neighbors and only the spiritual needs? Or is it also going towards justice? And what's the ratio there? Like, is it going less towards justice and more towards spiritual needs? Then maybe that needs to be right sized for it to be more towards justice, if anything. And that's my challenge here. So assess our resources. Number 2, cultivate curiosity. Instead of swooping into vulnerable communities and assuming we know what's best for them, what would it look like for us to ask questions without any specific agenda? We often overemphasize the spiritual with our neighbors because we have the scarcity mindset that if we spend resources on their physical liberation, they're not going to see Jesus. And and they're going to miss out on the spiritual freedom that Jesus has to offer, right? Like I run into this with well-meaning Christians all the time who say, true freedom is found in Jesus. And I'm like, yes. And at the same time, someone stuck in trafficking right now, for them, true freedom is found in you liberating them from their oppression. Someone who's stuck in an abusive marriage, someone who's stuck in a violent relationship, true freedom is liberating them from that. So ask them for their perspective. What do you think true freedom is? And don't assume that you know what true freedom for them is. Yes, like true freedom is in Christ. That is true as a statement, but they will experience that true freedom when you pull them out of their abuse physically. And I think that only comes from a posture of cultivating curiosity instead of making assumptions with our budgets. And then my third challenge to us, third way to decolonize our budget, is envision a new way forward. We have to do the work of reimagination and envisioning things again. And I also say this, I say, you may not have much control over what the Western church collectively does from here on out, but you probably have control over your own household budget and finances. You probably have some influence over your church community's budget. And you likely have some influence over your denomination, church network, or ministry's budget. So instead of being discouraged by everything outside our influence and control, let's do what we can with what we have and see what God does through that faithfulness. And again, it's nice to be successful. I'll throw this in too. It's nice to be successful. Success feels good. I'm a 3 on the Enneagram. I care about success. But, Jesus doesn't call us to success. He calls us to faithfulness. It's good to be effective, and we want to be professional and effective in the work of justice we do because our marginalized neighbors deserve the best. But Jesus, again, doesn't necessarily call us towards effectiveness. He just calls us to be faithful. So just start off doing whatever you can with whatever you have and trust God. The rest of it will come in time. The clarity will come. The community will come. And just see what God does through your faithfulness by showing up for your marginalized neighbors.
Joash, that is so good and so meaningful and helpful and grounding in a time that feels chaotic. What can we do that's in front of us? I'm like, we need like the next right thing from Frozen 2 playing behind you while you're saying it. Like, we're doing the next right thing.
Yeah.
I'm even thinking about the story you tell of the church with the crazy carpet.
Yeah.
Like, is it red carpet or orange carpet? It's
Yeah.
like is it an old Baptist church, or it probably was that type of a church at some point if it was red carpet. But, they could change the carpet to be less wild looking, but instead they're choosing to put that money towards justice. And so even if you don't have that money, like it can look like sacrificing, updating something for the sake of doing the next right thing with your money and doing something for your neighbor who is potentially, in crisis, is definitely in crisis. We all have neighbors right now who we could be utilizing funds towards supporting. So I just want to throw that out there as we end, that sometimes it can look like just foregoing an upgrade on something in order to seek after spending your funds somewhere else that maybe is in more of an immediate need than the red carpet that is an eyesore, which I'm sure actually probably people are fond of it now. But thank you so much, Joash. I look forward to having another conversation with you. Again, this is Joash with Bodies Behind the Bus, and we are calling the series Just Calling. If you have any questions or anything arose during this that you would like to talk to us about, feel free to email it in, and we will do our best to get back to you or to even address it potentially in like a question and answer type setting in the future. So thank you all for listening. Thanks for joining us, Joash.